Jennifer Weiner. Jennifer is an author who has written many adult books about life, love, friendship, and raising children. However, tonight she joins us for a different sort of book that may or may not have been inspired by Target, which, as if any of you have read, according to her FAQ, all of her books are inspired by Target. In Littlest Bigfoot, Jennifer's first children's book, she writes about life, friendship, and the hardships of being a child, which isn't all that dissimilar, I suppose, from her adult books. So, with this book today, her first children's book, Littlest Bigfoot, here is Jennifer Weiner.
Thank you guys all for coming. I'm so happy that this is an intimate group, having spoken to like 400 of the rowdiest, most hormonal fifth graders in the entire world. Like, I walked into the cafeteria and it just had that smell of like steamed cheeseburgers and lust that doesn't know it's lust yet. Do you guys know that smell? Yeah, and Lord help me, they didn't want to listen. And I just, I was like tap dancing frantically, and I was like, making fart jokes, and nothing helped. Nothing helped. So I thought I would sort of ask you guys what you'd like. Okay, so we have here The Littlest Bigfoot. This is my first children's book. It came out Tuesday, and it's about two misfit kids, one's a boy and one's a girl, and a misfit Bigfoot named Millie, who lives deep in the forest with her tribe, but doesn't want to live deep in the forest with her tribe. She wants to be out among the humans, or the Nofurs, as the Bigfoots call them. Or I could read to you a little bit from Hungry Heart, which comes out next month, October 11th, and I haven't... other than doing the audiobook recording, during which I ugly cried so hard that I think the house was shaking a little bit. I haven't read this yet. I haven't done the audience thing. So I'm putting this up to popular vote. I can do one, I can do both, I can do neither. I can just answer questions all night long. So let's have a show of hands. Who would like The Littlest Bigfoot? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You do both? Okay. All right. Well, why don't we do some Littlest Bigfoot? All right. So, I'm going to read a little bit about Alice, and the story starts with her. And I'm just going to start. On a clear and sunny morning in September, a 12-year-old girl named Alice Mayfair stood in the sunshine on the corner of 89th Street and 5th Avenue in New York City and tried to disappear. She was tall, so she slumped, curving her spine into the shape of a C, tucking her chin into her chest. She was wide, so she pulled her shoulders together and hunched forward with her gaze focused on the ground. Her hands, big and thick as ham steaks, were jammed in her pockets. Her big feet were pressed so closely together that a casual observer might think she had a single large foot instead of two regular ones. Her hair was the one thing that Alice could not subdue. Reddish blonde, thick and unruly, Alice's hair refused to behave no matter how tightly she braided it or how many elastic bands she used to keep it in place. Living with the mane, as she called it, was like having a 3-year-old on top of her head, a little kid who refused to listen or be good no matter what bribes she offered or what punishments she put in place. Alice had started her education at the Atwater School on New York City's Upper East Side. At Atwater, the girls wore blue and white plaid jumpers, and they sat in spindly antique chairs in small classrooms with polished floors. In her first week at Atwater, Alice had broken 2 chairs, torn 3 uniforms, and wandered away from her class during a field trip to a museum, necessitating emergency phone calls to her father, Mark, who was in Tokyo at the time. Perhaps she's more of a hands-on learner, said Miss Merriweather, the educational consultant her parents hired after that disaster. So first grade was at the Barton Academy, where the classrooms were painted bright colors, where the kids had recess 3 times a day, and where they learned to knit and cook in addition to read and spell. Alice remembered the squish and the squeal when she sat on the class guinea pig. The following week, she accidentally freed the class turtle, and the week after that, she almost impaled her teacher on a knitting needle. A different language, Miss Merriweather had suggested brightly. But during her second week at École Française, Alice came home every day with her crisp white uniform blouse stained with egg yolk or paint or blood. She had trouble sitting still during lessons and trouble remembering to speak French instead of English, and mandatory ballet class was a disaster best not spoken of. Alice's parents agreed not to sue the école for negligence after Alice fell off the stage during a recital. The school agreed not to sue them for the injuries the music teacher, Mademoiselle Léonie, suffered when Alice landed on top of her, not to mention the loss of their piano. In every school she attended, Alice was an outcast. She sat alone at every meal. She read by herself during activity choice time, and whenever kids had to pick partners, she ended up working with the teacher because no one ever wanted to partner with her. At home, Alice would lie in her bed and try to figure out what it was about her that other kids didn't like. She knew she looked different, but that couldn't be the entire answer. There was something about her that made them reject her almost as soon as they'd met her. Alice had examined every bit of herself, from her toenails to the top of her head, trying to pinpoint the difference. And she'd never been able to find it, but she knew that it was there. She knew every time a new group of girls looked at her, and then sometimes before she'd even said hello, they'd turn away, whispering and giggling. So that is Alice, and she's getting ready to go to this new school that is in the middle of the woods. So her school is in the middle of the woods. Next to the school is a lake. On the other side of the lake is more forest, and deep in the forest live the Bigfoots, who call themselves the Yare. They don't call themselves Bigfoots. They think it's a very derogatory term, sort of a slur. And all summer, they've been watching this school being constructed. And so when we meet Millie, she is hiding in a tree, and she's listening to the elders talk about this problem. We all know what's happened, Maximus said in his quiet rumble, as the speaking stick flared above his head. The Nofurs have built 12 new buildings, and this morning there was a welcome new learners banner hanging from 2 trees. A school, whispered Alia. A school means children. Children are curious. They will be having canoes or those yak boats. Kayaks, thought Millie, and rolled her eyes. They'll dare each other to come across the lake, or they'll hear us, or they'll see us, and they'll find us. Alia began twisting her hands in her apron, and Septima was anxiously nibbling at the fur on her fingers. Millie, meanwhile, was so giddy with delight that it was all she could do to keep from dancing on her branch. Of all the years she knew, Millie was the only one Millie was the only one who wasn't terrified of humans, the only one who'd never entirely believed the stories that young Yare were told. There was, for instance, the tale of the terrible old Nofur who had a white beard and wore a red suit that was, allegedly, trimmed with the fur of tiny baby Yare. Each winter, he would slip down the chimneys of unsuspecting Yare families. He was so small and slender that he could, of course, easily fit. And once he'd gain entry, he would creep around the house, piling food and toys into an enchanted sack. He would magic himself back up the chimney, then fly away and give everything he'd stolen from the Yare to greedy no-fur children who would eat up the candy and break all the toys. So be good, the Yare would say each winter, or the bad red suit Nofur will come down the chimney and be having your toys in his sack. Another story, even more terrible, claimed there was a Nofur small as a speck of sand who could fit through mesh window screens, and this horrible creature would fly into the bedroom of young Yare, slip inside their mouths, and yank out one of their teeth as punishment for not putting their things away. So be good, the Yare would whisper, or the bad fairy-tooth Nofur will come through your window and be having your teeth. Nofurs are dangerous, was what little Yare learned, but Millie had never believed it. She didn't believe a grown Nofur could fit down a chimney or fly through a window, and besides, what would Nofur children want with Yare toys, which were all handmade, carved from wood or sewn from scraps of cloth? Millie kicked at the tree trunk, feeling familiar frustration rising. Septima glanced up, her brown eyes narrowed, and Millie shrank back, hiding herself in the shadows. Sorry, she whispered and patted the lookout tree by way of apology as the elders continued to talk. Could be it's temporary, said Darius. Maybe they'll only be there for the fall, like a campout, you see, and then they'll be going back to wherever they were. Yer voices rose in a babble of squeaks and whispers. Maximus reclaimed the speaking stick. Let's not be losing our heads, he said. There are measures we can take without abandoning the village. We can cancel Halloweening. Now, when I started to write this story, I was thinking the way this all came about is my daughter Phoebe became obsessed with a show called The Littlest Bigfoot that ran on the Discovery Channel. And every, she would TiVo episodes and she'd be in there watching and I'd be like, hey, they find Bigfoot this time? And she'd be like, no. And I'd be like, I knew that. You know how? And she'd say, no. And I'd be like, because there's 3 episodes left. And if they found Bigfoot this time, they'd have nothing else to talk about. So I started thinking and the girls started talking to me about like, what would a Bigfoot's life be like in the world and where would they live? What would they do? To what extent would they sort of involve themselves in the human universe? Would they be online? Would they be like Amazon Prime customers so they could get stuff? Would they perhaps sell the things they made on an Etsy shop called Out of the Woods? Maybe, right? So, but the thing that we decided really quickly is that Halloween would be the one day of the year that they could actually go out into the world because, everyone would just assume they were wearing costumes. So, all right. So Maximus says we could cancel Halloweening. Millie bit her lip before she could yell no and give herself away. Halloween was the one time of year that the Yer were allowed to venture into the Nofur world. Maximus would pick out a town and scout it carefully, making sure there'd be enough children in costume so that half a dozen smallish Yer would not stand out. On October 31st, the Yer Littlies, practically vibrating with excitement, would climb into the old school bus. Maximus would drive them to town, and the Littlies, chaperoned by grown-up Yer who were themselves interested in the Nofur world, would be given the night to trick-or-treat. The Yer elders, most of them female, would peek into the Nofur houses or examine the Nofur fashions and discuss what they'd seen. It's called a French manicure, or still stainless steel. The Littlies would dash up and down the Nofur streets with their pillowcases to join the packs of humans and gather pounds of candy that they'd carry home on the bus. Every year, unsuspecting Nofurs would remark on the excellence of the Yer costume. You guys look so authentic. Every year, puzzled Nofurs would turn to their partners, asking, was there some Bigfoot movie that I missed? It was heaven, and now it was going to be taken away. So those are the girls. Those are the ladies. And so does anyone want to ask questions, especially the younger readers who are here? Does anybody want to know anything about this book, about books in general, about being a writer, about Bigfoots? I am at your disposal. So ask me anything or whisper to your moms and they can ask me. Listen, I know how this works, okay? My daughters are 13 and 8. The 13-year-old does not speak to me. We communicate solely through text. She will text me on her phone from her bedroom. I'm like, the calls are coming from inside the house. Kind of thing. And we'll like negotiate dinner time. Like, yes, you have to come down here just for 10 minutes. I'll set a timer on the microwave, but you have to like speak to me and look me in the face. But the 8-year-old still really digs me. So we get to go do stuff together. So she, does anyone want to know something about writing? Yes. Does my grandmother still live in South Florida? No, unfortunately. My Nana is 100. And she fell a year and a half ago, and she didn't hurt herself really badly, but they couldn't figure out why she had fallen, other than the fact that she was 98. And yeah, right. So she went back to Detroit, which is where she's from. She's in assisted living. And she was there like 2 or 3 weeks, and I called her and I'm like, how's it going? And she's like, okay, I guess. And I'm like, how's the room? Room's fine. How's the food? Food's not bad. And like, how are the people? And she's like, no one lets me sit with them at lunch. And I'm like, what? And she's like, I can't get into a bridge game. I tell them I play bridge and they just look at me. And I'm like, Nana, there are mean girls. There are mean girls in your home. And so I tweeted that. I'm on Twitter, of course. And so I tweet, I can't believe that there are mean girls in my, 98 Nana's assisted living. And an editor at the New York Times saw that tweet and said, you have to write about this. Yes. And so I wrote a column called Mean Girls in the Home. And, I got to interview Nana. And it just turns out that, like, the crap never ends. Like, it really doesn't end. It's like you can be in junior high or you can be in, death's waiting room. And somebody is still going to be like, no, that seat's taken. It's like, I'm like, show me to the Regina George of this place. And I will kick some ass. Sorry. But, it's like, because I go there and I'm just like, can I help? Can I, what if we did like a book club in your living room and didn't invite some people to like make it all exclusive? And she's like, Jenny? And I'm like, never mind. But, so no, Nana's back in Detroit. I'll be, knock on wood, celebrating Thanksgiving with her. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. Was it a hard transition to write children's? I worked on this, I'd say, for on and off for probably 2 years, and I didn't really think about how it was different than writing for grown-ups. I just tried to sort of do it the way I do an adult book. Here are my characters, and here's the situation, and here's the conflict, and here's what I hope is going to happen. And I wrote it, and I turned it into my editor, who's actually here with us tonight. This is Amy Cloud. Amy Cloud, my editor. And I turned it in, and I waited, and Amy very nicely said, this is like 100 pages too long, and there's there's a lot of stuff happening in here, and perhaps this is more of a trilogy than a single book. So we kind of, thank you. Yeah, so we're stretching it out, but I did learn some things about storytelling that I hope are going to actually help me with the grown-up stuff. And especially now that I'm out reading it to elementary schools, like, you got to have cliffhangers. You got to have a lot of action. You can't have a lot of description. You have to keep things moving. They don't care about the color of the sky or the texture of the pavement or the smell of the freshly cut grass. They just want to know what's happening. Which is interesting. It's interesting when you think about the difference between, quote unquote, literary and commercial fiction, because everybody says about commercial fiction, like, the writing's very smooth or it's really a page turner. And I think that what that means is there aren't those sort of like naughty, maybe interesting ways of describing stuff that you'd get like hung up on, And I think there can be beautiful writing in children's books, but there's definitely a challenge of keeping it moving and thinking about all of the different kinds of kids who might pick this up, like girls, boys, reluctant readers, eager readers, like all of the kids who are going to want to find something in here. So there was a lot of revising. But that was kind of it. That was how it went. So I'm dying up here. Like, what is going on? Can we do anything? Can we get the fan? It's the lights. I'm sorry. I'm like, I don't know if it's like premenopause or something as I like tell the world that. But hi, podcast. Yes. That is a really good question. I haven't. Yeah, I know. And the reason I know that graphic stuff is huge is because my all-time favorite, like, young adult, middle grade book was A Wrinkle in Time. And I was desperate to get my daughter Lucy to read it. And I kept buying her different versions of it. And I'm like, you have to read this. It is so great. You're going to love it. Like, because she's into that stuff. She's into fantasy. And she would just like, nah, nah, nah. And finally, I found a graphic novel version of it. And she devoured it. And then she's like, where's that book you were trying to give me? So thank you. Yes. Well, I tried. But, I really do believe that like there's a book for everyone out there, and I really also think, thank you, that oh, we're gonna plug it in.
Yes.
All right, this is exciting. Pardon. This is behind the scenes with Jen and Amy. It is. Thank you. How do you guys live here? Like, what do you even do? In the pool. That's a good answer. Right? God. Right? I know. It's like, where's my baseball bat? Like, all right. Anybody else want to know anything? Yes, in the back, in the Batman shirt. Uh-huh. How involved was I, and was I satisfied? Okay. When the rights to In Her Shoes were sold, I made one of the truly rare mentally healthy decisions of my life. And I said, I told the story that I wanted to tell, and it's on the page, and this is going to be their story to tell on the screen, because I do not know from movies, and I don't want to be there, like telling them how to do their business. And I didn't like have the idea that I was going to like become BFFs with the movie stars. I was just like, I had just had a baby, and I was just going to like let them do their thing. So, I was really, really, really happy, I think, with the vast majority of the stuff that they did. I liked that they kept a lot of the Jewish aspects. I liked that they kept the older characters who, they say it's like teenage boys driving the film industry, driving ticket sales. And so like they're not going to go see like a love story where Shirley MacLaine is the one falling in love. But they kept that. The only thing I was really kind of brokenhearted about was the character of Rose in Her Shoes was a fuller figured woman. And when they cast Toni Collette, I was thrilled because she'd been in Muriel's wedding and she'd gained weight in Muriel's wedding. And I'm like, well, she'll just do it again. Except she had just made a movie where she had played a grieving mother who was, who the way she coped with her grief was by not eating, which made no sense to me whatsoever. I was like, reviewing the movie in my head, and I'm like, this made no sense. But so they would call me from Hollywood, and they would be like, all right, she's gained 5 pounds. And I'd be like, yes, so have I. Okay, like just during this phone call that has happened, And then they're like, she's gained 10 pounds, and I'm like, whoopee. And I was like, does she need me to come out there and help her? Like, has someone told her about donuts? And then they call me up, and then she's like, we're really, really sorry. Like, she's gained 15 pounds, but she's hit the wall. And I'm like, there's no wall. Like, I have not discovered such a wall, said wall. And I got some grief from that from people that were just like, in the book it was this way, and in the movie it was that way. But, all things considered, I think I came out relatively unscathed. So I was happy. I'm the rare author who can say, yes, I really liked the movie, as opposed to like, well, that's one version of things, thinking to myself, a crappy one. So no, it was good. So we have more kids here now. Should we read another little bit of The Littlest Bigfoot? We'll do another couple pages, and then we can go back to questions. Okay, so for our late arrivals, we have introduced, that's okay, traffic, right? Yeah. So we've introduced 2 characters. We have a lonely human girl named Alice, and we have an outcast little Bigfoot named Millie who wants to meet the humans and be part of their world, like Ariel, only more clothing. Fur, lots of fur. I think one of the things that maybe I was secretly thinking was like, and if Disney buys the rights, they can't put her in a bikini top because she's a Bigfoot. So we have these 2 characters, and now we're going to meet a boy named Jeremy. Okay, so Jeremy is your name Jeremy? Do we have a Jeremy in here? Do you know a Jeremy? Oh my gosh, that is fantastic. All right, so Jeremy in this book has 2 older brothers. And one of his older brothers is the smartest kid that has ever gone to this school district. And he's already done with high school by 14, and he's in college. And his other brother is the best athlete that this school district has ever had. And he's like all-state football and lacrosse and soccer and a couple other things. And Jeremy's just kind of an average kid who feels understandably perhaps overlooked by his parents who have raised these 2 superstars. And Jeremy The one thing about Jeremy that sort of distinguishes him is that he has seen a Bigfoot. He was out in the woods, he was walking around, and he saw this like giant hairy thing like racing by, and he tried to film it. And so he believes in Bigfoots, and we meet him in class. Who's next? Miss March sounded bored as she peered over her classroom from behind old-fashioned glasses. Jeremy Bigelow thrust his hand in the air, and the entire 7th grade groaned. Let's give Jeremy the respect he gave each of you. Jeremy? Miss March waited while Jeremy made his way to the front of the classroom with a remote control clicker in his hands. May I have the lights off, please, he asked. Miss March nodded at Lucy Jones, whose desk was closest to the switch. Lucy made a face at Jeremy and flicked the room into darkness, allowing Jeremy's opening slide, red letters on a black background, to come into focus. Bigfoots, they walk among us, the letters read. The groans got louder. This is the exact same report he gave last year, Lucy shouted. And Jeremy quickly clicked his remote until the words, now with exciting new research and evidence, appeared as a subtitle. Before anyone else could complain, Jeremy began. As some of you may remember, yeah, from when you gave the same report last spring, whispered Olivia to her best friend Sophie. Jeremy ignored her. The myth of the Bigfoot has persisted throughout time. Civilizations, starting with the cavemen, drew pictures or told stories about gigantic fur-covered forest dwellers. In China, they are known as the wild men or the Yeren. The Tlingit talk of the Kushtaka. Here in Standish, there have been reports of the Bigfoot. He clicked to the next slide. This is a still from the 1967 film by Patterson and Gimlin. He turned so he could look at the picture of the gigantic, fur-covered, unmistakably female creature with thick arms and trunk-like legs glancing shyly sideways. This film was taken deep in the woods of Northern California by 2 investigators who devoted their lives to proving that Bigfoot was real. In the back row, Austin Riley made an armpit fart. Let me tell you, don't say armpit fart in front of 400 kids in a cafeteria at the end of the day. It prompts armpit farts. Hashtag who knew, right? Okay. Jeremy continued. When Europeans first arrived in the New World, evidence suggests that they also found villages of Bigfoots. Aisling Tolliver waved her hand in the air. Excuse me, but shouldn't that be Big Feet? She looked hopefully at Miss March, who sometimes gave extra credit. Bigfoots, said Jeremy. Let's move along to this new evidence you mentioned, said Miss March. Jeremy clicked to the next slide, a woodcut of a pilgrim village. This illustration, he said, is thought to depict a scene from the village that became our town of Standish. For all we know, we could be attending classes on the bones of the Bigfoots. He paused, letting his words echo, which they did until Austin armpit farted again. Olivia was braiding Sophie's hair, and in the front row, Hayden Morgenthau was resting his head on his forearms and snoring softly. Jeremy pushed on, clicking to slides that explained Bigfoot biology. Once thought to be descended from the great apes of Africa, scientists now believe that Bigfoots are simply hominids who evolved at the same time as Neanderthal man. Another slide. Is that from the National Enquirer? Asked tattletale Megan Carpenter, who sat next to Aisling in the back row. It's been widely reprinted, said Jeremy, and sighed. Just wait, he thought. Wait until I find one. Wait until I show you. So that's the end of that little section. That is Jeremy. So anybody else want to know about Bigfoots or this book or any books or books into movies or anything at all? Yes. When did I know I wanted to be a writer? Probably as soon as I understood that you sort of had to be something. As soon as I got the memo about jobs and supporting oneself, which was probably pretty early, if knowing my mother, it was always the only thing that I was good at, and it was also the thing that I loved. And so this was the thing that I wanted to do when I grew up, and I'm really, really, really lucky that I get to do it every single day. So, anyone else want to know? Yes. A character that I love the most or relate to the most. I think that there's in a lot of books, there's kind of like the me character, the me-ish character, the character who is me at 28, or me if this had happened, or me if that had happened. But I have to say, I have spent a lot of time with Alice and Millie and Jeremy now, and I really, really like them. They're interesting, and it's interesting to go back and write kids and try to think about the ways that they're different and the ways they're the same and the things that they want and how they go about getting them. So, anyone else want to know something? Yes, in the back. Oh, Jesus. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let this be a lesson to you all, okay? If you are tired and if you are hungry, make someone take the internet away before you get the news that Oprah has picked a memoir of motherhood and marriage that is not your memoir of motherhood and marriage. And then you find out that the author of that is just very different from you and does things a different way and is published by Oprah's publisher, and you get all up in your feelings and post it on Facebook. Don't do that. But thank you, because I too believe that everyone's entitled to screw up, and that kicking someone while they're down is kind of an ugly impulse that I think that social media encourages. There's always the dog pile. There's always oh, somebody screwed up, let's jump on her because that's going to make me feel maybe better about the thing that I screwed up and no one knows about. So, if that gave anyone out there permission to not feel like crap for being jealous of someone or envious of someone or angry, even in public. So, but thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Does it make me nervous about my upcoming memoir? I mean, here's the thing. Hungry Heart is really, really honest. I knew I was going to write a collection of essays, and I thought it was going to be a lot of the stories that I tell, like the story of how I wrote Good in Bed and got it published, or how In Her Shoes became a movie, or the story of my mom coming out, which is a story that I've told a lot because it's the kind of story that when you tell it, you get some distance from it, and you no longer become a character in it, but you become the author of it. Things hurt less when you're the author as opposed to something someone is happening to. So I turned in that version of the book where it was sort of this story, that story, this story. Some of them I just sort of had on a save get key in my head. And then I got some feedback, and I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I'm 45 years old, I'm 46 now, I don't want to lie. But I look 45. If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to really do this, I should go there, because I believe that there is power in women being honest about their lives. And if somebody wants to give me crap for having a bad day and picking on another writer, and then an hour later realizing oh, I was picking on another writer, let me take that down. I really feel let she who has not screwed up cast the first stiletto. So, and I'll say that to people, and I'll say look, if watching me make a botch of my life sometimes makes other people feel all right about themselves. I mean, one of the pieces called me a serial recidivist, or somebody who just gets mad at people all the time, and I was really hurt by that. And then I'm but you know what? I do make mistakes, and I do say things I regret, and I will probably, despite my best efforts, continue to make mistakes and occasionally say things I regret. And all I can do is try to do it less and try to behave better, but I'm never going to be perfect. I know that I'm never going to be perfect, and I don't think women should have to be. I think we can screw up and we can own it and we can move on, and we can be honest about how we're feeling, even if we have pneumonia, and not just slug down half the bottle of Dayquil and pretend it's all okay. But thank you. I really appreciate you saying that. It's been a long week. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing quite finding the story about Jennifer Weiner has no empathy and is a mean girl posted on your Facebook page. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I don't understand. I think this is quite ironic. And then I took it down. So it's like, go post that on your Facebook page, lady. All right. So who else would like to know something now that we're getting it all out there? I apologize to the children in the audience who are probably like, what? What's even happening? Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. My editor's here. We're not going to no. Do I have the whole story planned out? Okay, so basically that is the plotter versus pantser thing. Like, am I the kind of writer who like figures every twist and turn and outlines it, or am I sort of someone who's like, I'm just gonna see where this takes me? And I'm like, I'd say that I'm like 50-50. I generally have an idea of who my characters are, and I generally have an idea of how I want the end of the book to feel. Not always exactly what it's going to say or exactly what it's going to happen, but how I want it to feel. But as I'm writing, things change. And as I get feedback from my agent or my editor, I revise, and I always think things can get better. Like, I really, I'm never going to be one of those writers who sort of turns in a manuscript and says, here it is, and do not touch a word of my sterling prose. Like, I always want to hear, like, what's wrong with my sterling prose so that I can make it better. But, yeah. So, anyone else writing? Yes, in the back. For Candy Shapiro. Okay, so once upon a time, I was 28 years old, and I was dating the nice Jewish boy. And I'd been dating the nice Jewish boy for 3 years, and I was doing the thing that you do when you've been dating the nice Jewish boy for 3 years, namely choosing my china pattern and naming our children in my head, right? Josh and Shoshana, if anybody's interested. And then it occurs to me, I'm like, I should perhaps find out if this guy is on the same page with me. And it turns out he wasn't. And he's like, we should take some time apart and really think about things because this is a big step. And I'm like, wow, did that sound mature and responsible for somebody who has the biggest bong I've ever seen? Sorry, kids. I went home to Philadelphia to think about things in a mature and responsible way. He went home to his bong and then started dating a social worker, which was bewildering to me because I'm just like, if you wanted like somebody kind and understanding, what were you doing with me in the first place? Because I'm mean. And so then it was this thing of like, I had been honestly like a little bit on the fence about the relationship. I was like, is he the one? I'm not sure. I don't know. Can I see my whole life with him? But once we were no longer together, my brain did this thing of convincing me that he was the only man who would ever love me or want to be with me. And that if I didn't get him back, I was going to die alone in my single girl apartment in one of those tragic urban deaths where no one knows you're dead until the smell seeps out underneath the door and your neighbors call 911. And when the cops come, they discover that the dog has eaten your face. And I had a really little dog, and so I was just like, I can't let this happen. So I moped for 6 months, and I was a pathetic wreck. And this happened in the 90s, in the summer of Titanic. And yes, I would drive and cry and sing "My Heart Will Go On" in a crappy French-Canadian accent. And then I was just like, okay, what do I know how to do? I know how to tell a story. I'd been a reader my whole life. I'd been a journalist for like 8 years at that point. I'd been an English major in college. I'd studied creative writing. I'd published short stories. I'd published essays. And I'm like, I am going to tell a story where a girl who is a lot like me has to get over a guy who is a lot like Satan. And I was going to give this girl like every wonderful thing that I ever wanted because I wasn't sure if I was going to ever get wonderful things. And that was good and bad. So that was where Canny came from. And it's funny because in real life, I didn't marry the guy who the guy in the book was based on. I married someone else. but then that marriage did not last. It served its time, and then it went back into the ground to nourish love that might bloom henceforth. But I reconnected with the guy who was the inspiration for The Guy in Good and Bad, and we got married in March. So, yeah, I know, right? It all worked out, so all good. So, but thank you. That's I mean, Good and Bad is still in print, which is like wacky to me. It's in like its 56th printing, which is like just like bananas. And I sometimes say it to my mother when she accuses me of not being, hardworking or whatever, and tries to make me sleep on the inflatable mattress when I go home. I'm like, my book's in its 56th printing. She's like, get the pump. So, anyone else? Questions? Yes, young person. How did I come up with? I was right with you till there. How did I come up with? What did you say? With The Littlest Bigfoot. Okay. My daughter Phoebe, who's 8. How old are you? Yeah, my daughter Phoebe is 8, and she was watching this show called not The Littlest Bigfoot. She was watching a show called Finding Bigfoot on the Discovery Channel, which was about these Bigfoot hunters that were looking for Bigfoot. And we would talk about like, are Bigfoots real? And if they are real, where would they live? And what would they do? And how would they feel about humans? And so that's how I started thinking about Bigfoots. And that's how I started writing this book. So that is why I'm into Bigfoots. And I'm not sure I believe Bigfoot's real, but I know Phoebe does. Phoebe is a true believer. So anybody else want to know something? Yes. Mm-hmm. The first lesson I would say a writer has to learn is be a reader. I think that writers are people who are always reading, are always just looking for that next great story or that next great sentence or that next great character or that next great line, and are just reading everything. And I would say, if you want to be a poet, read poetry, but don't just read poetry. Read like science journals and mysteries and, magazine articles and essays and blog posts. Read everything. I think that that's the first lesson of being a writer. And the second lesson of being a writer is that a writer writes and doesn't need anyone to give her permission to say, now you're a writer because you have the right degree, or you studied with the right person, or you got published in the right journal. You give yourself permission to be a writer, and then you just start writing. And the third thing is just know that there's going to be a lot of pages that never see the light of day. When I started off, I didn't know, Malcolm Gladwell had not yet published his idea of like I think it's like the 10,000 hours it takes someone to master something. But when I did the math and when I added up like all the years I spent in classes and then as a journalist and writing stories and submitting things and getting rejected and resubmitting things and getting rejected, like it worked out just to that amount of time. So I really do believe that like it's not wasted, it's just practice. So read everything, don't wait for permission, and just know that you're going to have to like do a lot of drafts before something's ready to get published. I have friends who have gotten an agent with a novel that never sold. Like that was sort of their like, it was good enough to get an agent's attention, but it wasn't good enough to be published. But the next book was. So just keep on trucking. How are we doing on time? I am online though. Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Do I have a book coming out about being a mom of teens? Well, I dipped my toe in a little bit with certain girls where I went through a bat mitzvah, and my oldest daughter, Lucy, was actually in real life just bat mitzvahed in May. So we made it. So she's like turning that corner into true teenagerdom. So I guarantee you that there will be something to say about it. And I think it'll be a lot about like just teenagers in the modern age of communication, because I think that there's like so much more that kids are dealing with these days with like Snapchat, Instagram, texting, like just all of the stuff that like we used to just like put notes in people's lockers. And let me tell you, it is so different now. All right, so I thank you all so very much for coming. I'm going to be signing books. Where am I going to be signing books? Right there. Right there is where I will be signing books. So please ask me stuff. Come on over. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you. Oh, the raffle. Shoot. Okay, hang on. We have 2 copies, is that right, of Hungry Heart? Okay. And our first winner is 890628. That's you. All right. And our second winner is, let's see. I don't want to. It's 890633. That's you. Oh my God, fantastic. All right, so bring them over. I will sign them. Thank you all for coming.